Bob Osborne, and well, we'll take it away. Bob Osborne. Oh, there you are. You're there already. So anyway, there it is. Bob, take it away.
Good morning. Another lovely sunny day in Devizes. So today we're going to talk about the Commune that was established in Zennor, which forms quite a large part of the book I recently wrote, which was Zennor Spirit of Place. So
now, in the previous parts, you've alluded to the fact that you won't be able to have that anymore.
It's going to go paperback.
It is going to go paperback.
Yeah, I've done a deal so that with the people that are trying to block it, that I can publish a paperback if I acknowledge some of their material, some of their photographs that I've
well, that's fair.
taken. So, you know, we've done a kind of quite an amicable deal. Also, I think they want to be, they want to have a part of this book because the people who they represent, the artists that they control, are really not that significant. And when I've included them, it's only because they lived or followed in the footsteps of D.H. Lawrence and Alistair Crowley on the farm where I now live. So the mere fact that I've written about these people alongside D.H. Lawrence, Alistair Crowley and Robert Graves, who are three people I know an awful lot about, I think from their point of view, they see that as promoting their
well, that's all been beneficial, isn't
their
it?
artists. So yeah, it's all worked out in the end, and I found out.
So
you know,
we're happy then.
Yeah, so far. Yeah. Although there are people, the elements that are very unhappy about some of the things that I've revealed about the practices that went on the Zennor moors, including a very mysterious death of a Fabian lady. I'll go into that a bit during this chat.
But that's the whole point of this whole exercise, is to join a lot of dots.
Yes.
I mean
there's so many dots. It's such a complicated spider web, and it got deeper and deeper the more rabbit holes I went down. But fundamentally, where I live, you know, as I explained, Tregerthen means land of the rowan in Cornish, and of course the rowan was a tree that was planted to deter witchcraft. The first line in the book is, despite having the coolest name in England, Zennor has always been a centre for paranormal activity. So I've always been interested in paranormal activity, you know, having certain psychic abilities, and also I've been very interested in espionage. And of course I'm also, being a literature and an art student and a practicing writer and a practicing artist, that combining those three things in this area of research I did was, you know, I actually got quite obsessed with the interlocking narratives of these three, let's say, agendas or programs that the artists can be put into. So it's been a bit of a revelation for me, and it certainly helped, as I explained the other day, that by tapping into the spirit of place, which is extremely strong around Zennor, and especially on the farm where I live, Tregerthen Farm, not only did I occupy the physical space that D.H. Lawrence, you know, the great poet and writer who came down to form a commune where I am now during the First World War, but I also felt that I could occupy his psyche as well. So, you know, I've often worked along those lines in that when I want to access an artist or a poet or any activity, you know, I'm able to get into almost like a trance-like state. And as I explained, this is the analeptic method. And one of the good things that has pleased me is that when people, all the people I've written about in this book, some of whom I knew personally, others who I've accessed, other people have said it's almost as if you've brought Lawrence back to life. And that's one of the kind of comments that really does please me, because you know, also I've showed a different side of Lawrence, not necessarily a side that the narrative of the English literary establishment want or have covered. So with regards to Tregerthen, at the back of my garden there's a burial chamber. Now there's burial chambers scattered all over the Zennor moors, and this is called a quoit. What it is, it's like a uprights with a flat stone on the top, and one of the purposes of these quoits is that when people died, going back into the Bronze Age, which is where my farm was quite significant, Neolithic and Bronze Age settlement, obviously attached to ancient ceremonies and with a long history of pagan worship and witchcraft. They would put the dead body on the top of this slab, it's almost like a mortuary slab. And then the carrion, the crows and the ravens, of which also populate, the wild area where I live, will come and pick off all the flesh, and that's called a process of excarnation. So then the bones will be buried underneath this chamber. And there's chambers all over the moors. So also Lawrence interested in blood consciousness and the spirit of place. Also my interest in that this DNA then seeps into the atmosphere. It seeps into the soil. It seeps into the consciousness of the artists that can access these almost interdimensional activities. So a lot of to do with the summoning up from the earth. There's a whole hieroglyph around Zennor that a lot of artists, not only Lawrence, but a lot of painters have come and able to tap into. And what they do is they try and decode this hieroglyph. So in the wake of Lawrence, who was really a pioneer in this sense, a lot of other poets, a lot of artists, a lot of occultists, have similarly been able to transcend time and bring out these energies from the earth. So the brief background of D.H. Lawrence coming, basically he was walking on the coffin path behind my land, which is now a part of Tregethan Farm, and he's actually a fugitive from the literary establishment because he was traumatized by what was going on with the war. He wasn't a conscientious objector, but he objected to the fact that he knew that this war was business, an occultism rather than an actual battle between the English and the Germans. So he was in escape, and he was looking for what he termed was a Shangri-La. A utopian community. The sense of looking for a utopian community is a Jungian archetype that has really informed a lot of the 20th century. And when we look into the Commune in Switzerland after this Commune, we can see how these agendas and these programs were all laid out. So to a certain extent, this Jungian archetype, which I, having grown up in the second half of the 20th century, and also having immersed myself in the literature, the philosophy, and the art of the first half of the 20th century, which was really my main subject of interest. I can almost now sense that I was coming at the latter part of this counterculture agenda, and I have spent large parts of my life living in communes in Germany, living in a cave in Crete, as I've documented, and there's always this search for a utopia, and it's to escape from the actual horrors of modern society and industrialization. So Lawrence was a keenly sensitive man who was also had a big attachment to the earth, being a coal miner's son. So his desperate search was to escape what he called graveyard worms. So he was a bit of a misanthropist, Lawrence, and despite the fact that he was championing the common man and the miners, he really didn't want anything to do with the dumbed down version of humanity that he saw was coming in with the 20th century, with the New Age and the New World Order. So when he came to Tregethan, he found this little hamlet, which is where I now live, and this place has no signs, nothing. You wouldn't even know it was there. It's about a mile outside the ancient village of Zennor, tucked between the moors and the sea. Okay. So when he had attempted before to set up a commune, various communes in Cornwall, but they were all unsuccessful. And I think the reason they were unsuccessful was that he wasn't able to tap into the energy that he was looking for. This utopian, this heavenly, this promised land, which he called Zennor. And he described beautifully in his travel writings how when he came over the shoulder of the hill, he felt he was coming to the promised land. And this is an archetype that carried on because a lot of the artists that came to Zennor, and it is pretty much an area that's always been inhabited by artists, by poets, by occultists, and including myself, who the minute I first set eyes on Zennor, I've also felt as though I was coming into the promised land, but then I've had that with other places around the world. And Lawrence really, when he came here, he thought this was it, he's going to stay there for life. And the other places that he tried to set up these communes, they just weren't right. And he felt as though Zennor, and particularly Tregurthen, which is this tiny hamlet divided into two, there's Lower Tregurthen, which is the farm where I now live, and there's Higher Tregurthen, which is a collection of cottages just down a lane. So Lawrence in 1916 was also very disaffected by, he was always disaffected by the establishment. They hounded him everywhere he went, until they dragged him into their Fabian Agenda. So Lawrence had written a book called The Rainbow, which had been banned, and it was banned by a called Herbert Musket, on the basis that it was scandalous, because Lawrence was very interested in the sexual connection between people, not necessarily in an orthodox way, also involving rituals, and it was banned, and all the books were burnt on the basis that Lawrence was under the control of German psychologists. Well, when I first read that sentence, it's clearly a very significant thought, and to a certain extent they hit the nail on the head in a roundabout way. So Lawrence's idea was to call this commune Rananim. Now Rananim is a Hebrew word, and basically means verdant, and Lawrence was introduced to the concept of Rananim by a Russian occultist and a Russian poet called Solomon Koteliansky, who was there was quite a lot of significant Russian intellectuals around the time mingling with the Fabians and with the British elites, and Solomon Koteliansky or Sol taught Lawrence a lot of the secrets of the Kabbalah, combinations of Eastern and Jewish mysticism. So Lawrence called this commune Rananim, and he then tried to attract a lot of other people down, because Lawrence had this vision of living in a community, and this was clearly an agenda that Lawrence was part of with his German wife, Frieda von Richthofen, who is a very interesting character, and I've gone into her background quite deeply, and I'll talk a little bit about her in a minute. So this commune, he tried to attract Bertrand Russell, who was probably one of the most significant members of the Fabian network, that elite cultural and intelligent class of people that more or less dictated the thought patterns and the thought processes, what was going to come in the 20th century. I think Bertrand Russell found it wouldn't have survived very well because he was very effete, and but what he did attract is that he attracted a group of people, including an occultist and a musician, a very underrated musician called Philip Heseltine. So Philip Heseltine was a very interesting character, and I partly got interested in the group of people because, to all intents and purposes, they are very, very eccentric. And having come from a very eccentric place and a family myself, I'm always drawn into the sordid and the scurrilous details of their lives. And this is Philip Heseltine then, an aspiring composer, highly educated and very wealthy. And this is his girlfriend, Puma Channing, smoking the pipe there, you see. So Puma Channing was a real beauty, and she was also
they look really happy.
Yes.
They're really enjoying themselves.
Yes. I'd enjoy myself if I'd been with Puma Channing. She was the mistress of a lot of artists at that time. And Puma was slang among those circles for lesbians. So Puma was bisexual, and Philip Heseltine was an absolute womanizer, and he changed his name to Peter Warlock because he came under the influence before the First World War of the arch wickedest man in the world, who I've also researched, who also played a significant part in these communes, and that of course was Aleister Crowley, the Great Beast, or 666, or Baphomet. So Peter Warlock seemed to undergo psychological transformation. Warlock was also very obsessed with D.H. Lawrence, and so a lot of people were obsessed with D.H. Lawrence because he did have a messianic quality, and because he was from a background that wasn't the same as the elite Oxford, Cambridge, Bloomsbury, Fabian educated class. I think they adopted him as their almost their poster boy, and unwittingly, poor old D.H. Lawrence, I think, became put into a counterculture agenda. And my thesis is that the counterculture agenda of the 20th century was, in fact, all the literary and the artistic establishment was controlled by the Fabian elites, and of course the Fabians were controlled by the Freemasons, and the Freemasons were of course infiltrated and controlled by the Illuminati prior to them. So effectively the counterculture, the Eon of Horus, the New Age, the Age of Aquarius, is one big Illuminati agenda. So Lawrence, Peter Warlock agreed to join Lawrence in this commune. In fact, he was very excited by the prospect because, I think the thing about these communes, and when we look into what happened with the Swiss commune, there's a lot of free love, there's a lot of wealthy people, there's a lot of dabbling in black magic, there's a lot of sex, there's a lot of laying around sunbathing and creating great art, of which we can't dispute. So Warlock, when he undergone this transformation, I don't know that, I'm not saying that he was mind controlled by Aleister Crowley, but Aleister Crowley certainly had a lot of disciples among Lawrence's entourage. So Peter Warlock used to sign his name with the pentagram, and he also indulged in quite a lot of Crowley sex magic, and he claimed that he can have an orgasm in every part of his body, including his fingertips. So Peter Warlock joined this crazy commune along with D.H. Lawrence and Frieda von Richthofen, who was from the Bavarian military establishment, also a highly interesting bohemian woman, also a complete nymphomaniac. So Warlock joined Lawrence, and Warlock was kind of coming and going because he made his girlfriend Puma pregnant, and then he made various other women pregnant too. So he was moving between Cornwall and London, and while he was in Cornwall, one of his great composition pieces was the Curlew, which is an absolutely haunting piece of choral music based on the curlews, that lots of curlews where I live, as long as ravens and crows. So this is an absolutely delightful piece of choral music, probably his most famous work. And this kind of captured the cri de coeur that happened in the skies, and a lot of his work was based on Elizabethan lyricism, and that whole Elizabethan concept, where that was the first time when mysticism, occultism, espionage were all combined into this kind of agendas that really went on to establish the what then became the British Empire, because it was John Dee who was Queen Elizabeth's occultist, who made the term the British Empire. So Warlock's music, had lots of references to these things. Also, it was based on a poem by Yeats, who was part of the Golden Dawn, the world that Lawrence was in. And in that world, at that late Victorian time, at the start of the 20th century, among the ruling elites, there was an obsession with occultism, with theosophy, with the Knights Templars, with combining a lot of these activities into arts. There was a lot of intellectual belief systems that came from Russia, that came from Germany too, and so these people really had access to a lot of these. Not only they were highly educated, but also they had access to sacred knowledge, and Lawrence certainly, in his own way, he was like a conduit for getting this knowledge through the physical realm rather than through the intellectual realm, because he didn't have the same background information. But having grown up the way he did and having such a connection to the earth, they knew that he had a real connection, and he could really channel these things into his work. So to a certain extent, he had something that they didn't. Inevitably, this commune ended very badly. Peter Warlock then, he was famous for riding his motorbike naked. He was part of a world in London and also in Cornwall. He made repeated visits to Cornwall. And one of his chums was a guy called Lord Tredegar. Now, Lord Tredegar had a haunted castle in Wales. His name was Evan Morgan, and he was part of this cultural elite that Warlock inhabited. Warlock inherited a lot of money. His uncle was a collector of Rembrandts, and Warlock attached himself to Lawrence and wanted to invest in Lawrence's schemes for Ranelagh, specifically this part of Cornwall. So Lawrence also wrote a book at that time called Goats and Compasses, which is about exploring themes of androgyny, and Lawrence probably was a what we say a closet homosexual, but he wanted to explore his own sexuality. So this book, Coats and Compasses. Peter Warlock was also displayed in his novel Women in Love, which was the seminal novel he wrote at Tregethan, in a very bad light, because Lawrence was one of those people that he could mingle with these classes, but ultimately he despised them all. So when he made a lot of attacks on what he called Fabianism and Cambridgeism and Advancism, and he already saw, as I have subsequently seen 120 years later, that what he called this Fabian mindset was actually a dry rot in the culture of England at that time, because England was pretty much controlled by Masons and Rosicrucians, and these Victorian elites, including Darwin, Huxley, were all pretty much webbed up with the Bavarian Illuminati belief systems, which we can go into another time. So it all ended badly. Warlock subsequently went mad, gassed himself, committed suicide. He became increasingly under the influence of Aleister Crowley's black magic. And I think Crowley said that when he died, gassed himself in London, it was due to a ritual that had gone wrong, because Warlock really didn't understand black magic rituals or thelemic rituals that Crowley had perfected. Now, Warlock, when he changed his name from Philip Heseltine to Peter Warlock, which became his name as a composer, it's very interesting because Warlock comes from the Old English term warlogger, or werelegger, which is German actually, and this means wizard, necromancer, deceiver. So again, you in the terms of, he thought he was turning himself into a wizard, and so he dabbled in all these what they call dark arts, and ultimately he went mad and killed himself. So he was one of the characters in this crazy entourage, but he was just one of many. You could loosely call mad, but they were all under the influence of certain forces that somehow they got dragged into. Now, the other group in this commune in the early days was Lawrence really tried to get people to join him in this commune because he didn't have any money, but he had a lot of wealthy friends who were happy to be involved with Lawrence because of his genius as a poet, and they recognised that this was someone who really did have the ability to draw summon up forces that may be dark, but in any case a very elemental artist, and also he became undisputably one of the greatest writers of the 20th century, and also a counterculture icon, which is something that he probably didn't intend to become. So these guys were John Middleton Murray and Catherine Mansfield, and when Lawrence married Frieda von Richthofen just before the First World War, these two eminent Fabian artists joined the commune at Tregethan and stayed in the group of cottagers. Lawrence has exemption from the war because of his TB, but he had to walk down to the farm, which is the farm where I now live, and he had to do farm work. Although he was willing, he was really too feeble to do farm work. And I've interviewed the grandchildren of the Hocking family who owned the farm where I now live, and their grandchildren are my neighbours. And of course, I've written a whole chapter on how Lawrence had an affair with William Hocking and tried to introduce him into future communes, and also inveigle him to performing black magic rituals on the Zennor moors. But the guy John Middleton Murray was part of this Fabian establishment, and he had a magazine called Rhythm, and of course he was reviewing Aleister Crowley's work at that time. There was a lot of interest in these occult magazines, in vampirism, in interdimensional travel, in time travel, connected to the H.G. Wells's work. So a lot of these elite Fabians were really dabbling in this, these arts and these abilities to transcend your circumstances, because they had money to do it. So Middleton Murray joined this commune, and of course Lawrence, Middleton Murray's attached himself to Lawrence, but Lawrence also tried to get Middleton Murray to indulge in what's called Blutbruderschaft rituals. Now, Blutbruderschaft is a German term that comes from Teutonic Knights, and there's also got links with, effectively it means blood brotherhood. And of course, the Germans, and the Bavarian Illuminati have a long history of exchanging blood and blood rituals and sex rituals. This has been an obsession with some of the Teutons and of course later the Nazis. This wasn't nothing new. This goes back to the Knights Templars. They're also doing blood exchanges and blood sacrifices. So Lawrence knew all about this because Lawrence was steeped in theosophy and highly educated, who channeled a lot of this information. So he tried to engage Middleton Murray. Middleton Murray felt a bit uneasy about going the whole way with Lawrence on them. So Lawrence was always taking him up on the moors, tapping into the entities and performing these rituals, on the stones and the rocks. And this became a bit of a scandal locally when they realised that these people that were renting these cottages, they didn't even know they were writers. They just thought they were lunatics who were escaping the war. And of course, because Frida was German and walked around in Bavarian folk costumes, they came under a lot of suspicion. And this whole commune was constantly watched by British intelligence. And they had coast watchers, hovering outside their cottages. Lawrence was paranoid enough anyway. But then he became increasingly paranoid that they were after him, which, they were after him to control him. So what he termed these Bruderschaft rituals, Middleton Murray didn't like it. He felt he couldn't go there. So what he termed was a queer wrestling match. Now later, great film made by Ken Russell, which I think some people might know, which was Women in Love. And now Women in Love was the book that Lawrence was obsessed with, and this was to do with the nature of sexuality, almost the nature of androgyny, where you have the body of a man but the female psyche. So he was interested in all these things at the time, which were very prevalent attitudes to do with the intermediate sex and the Fabian agenda towards transgenderism, and then ultimately called to transhumanism, which I think we've gone into in other areas. It's a very densely packed program. So in the film Women in Love, which is actually one of my favourite films, and it always was before I even came to Zennor, in the gladiatorial scene, Lawrence and Middleton Murray, which were played by Oliver Reed and Alan Bates, have a wrestling match in front of an open fire. And this is a kind of very graphic explanation of entering each other's flesh and entering each other's psyche, and like these battle of wills and the blood brotherhood that they could have without, the other women involved were Frida von Richthofen, Lawrence's wife, and Middleton Murray's wife, Catherine Mansfield, who we'll talk about in a minute. So this film, subsequently, another bit of synchronicities. Many years later, I was selling wine to Oliver Reed and went for a drink with Oliver Reed and Hugh Bennett. Not a good idea if you want to get home that night. And also Ken Russell was involved to a certain extent because great filmmaker, made some great films about Delius and other tortured geniuses, apart from Lawrence. And when he died, a friend of mine did his death mask, and he was buried in a Mad in England t-shirt, which is one of the brands that I've got on my arm, which is the brand that I combined with Rebel Not Taken to combine the concept of rebellion, with English eccentricity, which I've always been kind of attracted to and interested in. So this of course went wrong. There were bitter fights between the Frida von Richthofen, Lawrence, Middleton Murray. Lawrence felt that Middleton Murray wasn't prepared to go into the depth, summon up the demons that Lawrence was summoning up, and so ultimately they fell out, quite viciously. And Middleton Murray's wife was a very interesting woman called Catherine Mansfield, and of course I've gone deeply and obsessively into all these people's lives. Catherine Mansfield was part of this commune. It all turned very wrong. Paradise. There was a serpent in paradise, and what went on between them. Lawrence was taking knives to Frida. Catherine Mansfield was upset that Middleton Murray and Lawrence were going on these long walks on the moors, that Lawrence was shagging a local farmer, William Hockin, that Frida seemed to be also having sex with all of other members of this community, of this commune that spread along this coastline. It wasn't confined to Tregarthen, it extended to a place called Gernard's Head, which is a very mysterious and haunted place a few miles away to a village called Trevelle. So this whole coastline, other communes sprang up in the wake of Lawrence's commune. These people were attracted by Lawrence's vision of Ranelagh, of a modern utopia. And as far as Lawrence was concerned, and has been told to me by interviews I've seen with Hawkins, the idea of Ranelagh was not specific to a place. It was a state of mind, and it was a state of mind which involves freedom from bourgeois constraints. Creative writers really, getting down to what they want to do, regardless of morality. So, and being able to live a pretty good life in beautiful locations. So the concept of Ranelagh was in Lawrence's head to a certain extent, and it was a portable vision that he could move. So when the Zennor commune, failed due to many reasons, and caused absolute mayhem, and probably affected the lives of all the people that were in it. Not in a good way either. There's some curse on all of them. He went off to Mexico. He went off to Australia. Went to Sicily, Sardinia, and was always seeking this Ranelagh concept, which was quite a mystical search for a utopia, which of course is a Jungian archetype that is put into a lot of people at that time, especially artists, were programmed into this vision. So Catherine Mansfield, there she looks a bit haunted. She was a very interesting woman. I mean, where do we start? I mean, she was part of the Fabian crowd, New Zealand short story writer, very brilliant. Hated it at Zennor because complained about the ravens, the gulls. It was wild. It really is a wild place, and she had a very sensitive disposition. And she also suffered from tuberculosis, was very highly strung, very neurotic. Also, unfortunately, suffered a lot from gonorrhea because she was, again, bisexual. And she had a one-day marriage. She led a very free life, and she was also involved with lots of other men and women at that time. She was dabbling deeply into what we call the dark arts. She had a connection with Aleister Crowley again, who she didn't like and didn't trust. Nobody trusted Aleister Crowley for very good reasons, because he certainly, stirred the pot among the Fabian classes, and she took peyote with Crowley at a party, smoked hashish with him regularly. So, for someone from this kind of elite Bloomsbury background to be hanging out with Crowley, of course, she was sucked into that as well. Into the black magic, and then she had always been researching astral travel, spiritual matters, and she subsequently left with Middleton Murray after a disastrous few months living in this commune with Lawrence and Warlock and other even more eccentric people who were like joining the fray, coming down, taking other cottages around, apart from where I am now at Tregarthen, which was the hub of this commune. So she increasingly suffered mental depression along with her friend Virginia Woolf. She left, and then she really went down that road of spirituality, and she was always interested in the practice of Georges Gurdjieff, who was another big New Age guru for a lot of the people that are into the transcendental meditation, or what's called the fourth way, or the fourth dimension. So accessing the fourth dimension effectively means you're coming out of your third dimensional existence and accessing the fourth dimension. There's a whole esoteric philosophy about going through the chakras, and to access different dimensions in a literary or artistic sense means that you're unleashing forces within yourself. It can also mean, of course, interactive with other alien intelligence, alien life forces, or spiritual forces within the universe that most people cannot tap into. And even Lawrence, although he didn't really have a foot in the Fabian agenda, certainly not willingly. He knew that he was being used. He also realised that the knowledge, the arcane knowledge that he had and channeled, could not be dispersed among what he called what Rudolf Steiner called the thought corpses, i.e. the general, the sheep. Ultimately, I think Lawrence came to despise these people because he was trapped in two worlds to a certain extent, of being an artistic genius and also being fed up that the sheep would willingly go to be slaughtered in the Fabian War, the Fabian Great War. So when she joined, she left to go and join the Institute for Harmonious Development, which was run by Georges Gurdjieff in Fontainebleau in Paris. And then I think she became increasingly obsessed with the works of A.P.R. Edge. I mean, I'm not going to go into details about all these people, and there's many people that won't even know who they are, but you can like get the names and check them out, because each one of these is an incredible story, and how they all link up with each other again is phenomenal. So she went to study when she got tuberculosis and gonorrhea to the institute that George Gurdjieff was running in Fontainebleau. Now, at that same time, Aleister Crowley had an office, shall we say, in Fontainebleau, and I know that both Gurdjieff and Crowley were spying on each other, because a lot of these occultists were also involved in exchanging information, and there was occult wars going on between a lot of these organisations, depending on which society they belonged to, or which form of occult religion they were adhering to or promoting. So it was brought to my attention that Gurdjieff, who is very much a kind of the people that are studying yoga and meditation, how to ascend to the fourth dimension. A lot of these people were making lifestyle choices in order to pursue these ability to transcend your physical body. It's the kind of thing that you kind of need to have the time and the money to do. And it was brought to my attention that Gurdjieff, who became an icon of promoting this kind of Eastern religion, supposedly a Russian mystic, was actually really an East End boy called Frederick Dottel, who was born in Whitechapel, who had psychic gifts, also gifts as almost like a con man, mesmerism. So he learnt languages. He went on a cabin boy to India, then spent some time in India being programmed or brought into an agenda that was run by British military intelligence. And then, of course, he became this guru. And I've had podcasts with people who are obsessed with Gurdjieff, and I've told them this information. Of course, they're absolutely shocked. So, again, we're in the murky world of these links between these artists, between the occult and the hand of various intelligence agencies that are bringing people into their orbit. So that's Catherine Mansfield. I mean, I could say a lot more, but I'm going to move on to the next nutters that came down. This is a guy called Meredith Starr on the left, and you can see Meredith Starr, to all intents and purposes, conveys all the attributes of an Edwardian gentleman. Again, from a wealthy family. His real name was Herbert Close, and a lot of these characters, did change their identities and adopted new identities after they came under the influence of not only Aleister Crowley, but who is a leitmotif through all of Lawrence's entourage. Were involved with Aleister Crowley, probably apart from D.H. Lawrence himself, who, because Lawrence was a fugitive, as was Crowley. These two people were going all around the world, but although all the people they're involved with were all connected to each other, I haven't established a major connection between Lawrence and Crowley, except that these were two very I won't say narcissistic, but guys with huge egos and huge talents, and of course they were alpha intellects really at that time. So this guy Meredith Starr, he was also an occultist, and he was involved before the war. He wanted to become a wizard, and a lot of these people, around this Edwardian times, a lot of them were dabbling in things that really were beyond them. They didn't know what they were getting involved with. So he came under the influence of Aleister Crowley. He joined one of Aleister Crowley's occult groups. I think it was called the Order of the. I can't remember what the name of it was. But anyway, he came under the influence, and he was also taking a lot of hallucinogenic drugs, which Crowley was peddling. Crowley was a massive user of hallucinogenic drugs in order to access altered states, and also bring in access demons and access interdimensional creatures or summon angels and whatever you want to call it. So Meredith Starr came down in the wake of Lawrence's to join Lawrence's Commune, and he bought a little cottage, or he rented a cottage down the road with his then wife, Lady Stamford, who was a lady who inherited an estate in South Africa. Again, he had a lot of money, and he managed to live this hedonistic life. You know, he was the one that introduced Peter Warlock into black magic, and to a certain extent taught Warlock a lot of the stuff that Meredith Starr had learnt from Crowley. A lot of this knowledge is very arcane, and it's very difficult, you know, to understand and get your head around. So Meredith Starr was like always hanging around Crowley, trying to get further initiation, you know, into his ranks of becoming high priest and things like this. And I think Crowley dismissed him because although he gave him some tutelage, at the end of the day he described Meredith Starr, which I've said in the book, as that he went out of his mind and never came back. So Meredith Starr was involved with a lot of these ceremonies down in on the moors, you know, on these cottages, and also, you know, Warlock was involved with the Lord Tredigers of this world, and Lord Tredegar was very much part of this scene, and he had access to the aristocracy. So he had his castle in Wales, again, very eccentric man. He had an elephant in his grounds, and he was known as the Black Monk, and he had a coven of 13 witches. And the thing about these communes is that they start as communes, and then when they often get perverted, you know, in terms of the communes that Crowley established became covens. And similarly, the communes that then we'll talk about in the next section about how these spread to California. Inevitably, these communes, although they might sound like a good idea, you know, intrinsically, they often get perverted with Luciferian or satanic belief systems. And this is part of the program about these communes, and they're programmed to fail, and they're programmed to bring in agendas that then lead to the next agenda. So Meredith Starr, this photo of Meredith Starr, after he left, when Lawrence left, basically the whole thing fell apart, because Lawrence was the hub for this. He was the main prime and energy for these people to feed on, like almost like vampires, you know, and he then got divorced from his lady wife. He squandered a load of money, and then he had some various get-rich schemes as well. So a lot of these people were really charlatans, and they were attracted to this magical world or occult world, and they were dabbling in black magic, and it always ended badly for them. So then his scheme was then to adopt this guy called Meher Baba. Now this guy Meher Baba, in the photograph, he became a guru. I mean, you'd think that was a face. I mean, this is just hilarious, isn't it? So he was handling Meher Baba and was going to promote him as one of the next big gurus. So Meher Baba had some shady background in India. He was brought over by Meredith Starr, as a lot of other Indian gurus brought over, like Krishnamurti, who I can talk about in the next section. So Meredith Starr was touting Meher Baba as the new guru. So they went on tours of America, and he kept a vow of silence, and he worked through what's called a communication board. So people would have to communicate with him through some contraption that he had. I mean, I think they were complete. It was a complete fake. But anyway, one of the things that Meher Baba introduced to California when they were there, and a lot of the Californians and the Americans were sucked into this these scams, because, you know, Meredith Starr, Warlock, they were from the elites of the English establishment, and also Meredith Starr was also a poet, an occultist, you know, a vegetarian, a herb-eating carnivore. You know, he didn't really have an enormous talent in the sense that Lawrence did, but he had all the accoutrements of you know, that would impress the Americans. So he went on this tour with Baba, and one of the things he's famous for, probably the only thing that he had any legacy for, was the mantra, "Don't worry, be happy," which of course was taken up like many years later. And really it was him that introduced it, and every time he would go on the stage or do these tours, you know, talking absolute bullshit most of the time, he would always use the expression, "Don't worry, be happy." And the thing about these expressions is that they're like mantras, and of course the apotheosis of this mantra was Timothy Leary's turn on, tune in and drop out. Now Leary's mantra pretty much came from Huxley, which came from, you know, William Sargent, Dr. Evil, you know, who we've spoke about on a previous thing, you know, which comes from the whole thing about getting into hallucinogenic drugs, you know, tuning in to the vibes of the universe, and then dropping out. So this is another big program. And of course Goebbels was also a master, in terms of Nazi propaganda, who taught the West a lot, in terms of how to propagandize and control the masses. So he would have had these expressions, and of course, recently we've had expressions. We can see the same playbook being run with expressions like "Build Back Better." So you need probably like 3 little lines that you can put into the sheep's consciousness or the masses' consciousness, and it becomes like a mantra, and then you can start to materialize this mantra, and all you need is to use these almost like trigger words, to get people into a certain docile state. So at the end of this disastrous, I think people realised that Meher Baba was a charlatan, and that Meredith Starr was probably the most insane of all of these eccentrics. Meredith Starr asked, when it all went wrong and the business collapsed, he asked Baba to give him back the £400 that he owed him, otherwise he would expose him as a fraud. So that pretty much sums up that. So that was the crazy world of the Zennor Commune. Now, when I started researching this, I think this is fantastic. It's also very, very funny. And Lawrence was clearly used as a patsy by all these people. And one of my theories, is that basically the New Age, the whole sense of the New Age, that the New Eon, all these agendas were rolled out between 1900 and the First World War, and they were the result of the failing British Empire in the latter stages of the Victorian times. So at that time, a lot of these belief systems that came from various arcane knowledges, including the Knights Templars, Eastern mysticism, were all kind of rolled into one and used. And as far as I'm concerned, the New Age is kind of a Trojan horse for the New World Order. So the Age of Aquarius, we can go into that after that. So when I realised how chaotic this commune was, but also chaos magic is another important factor in that one of the tenets of the New World Order and a lot of the occult agendas is that you need to introduce chaos in order for the New World Order, and if you introduce enough chaos into people's lives, there will be a demand for someone stepping in. And of course, according to the belief systems which undermine a lot of these systems like United Nations, the belief system is that the person that's going to step in is Lucifer, and this is going to bring light, so that all links up to the Age of Aquarius. So all these little steps and agendas, ultimately partly explain where we are now. So when I looked at Zennor, which I became fascinated, I mean, I've gone into so much detail about all these people's lives. It's almost like I know them, as much as I know myself, because I can somehow get into these people's heads. I can access their states of mind, because I think I come from not the same elitist background, but I come from a similar background of extreme eccentricity and like trauma in a way, in the sense that I don't have normal standards of behaviour that I'm confined to. I'm a free thinker, so I'm not attached to any agenda. I'm not attached to any political belief system, any religion. So I can see these webs between these people, and this network. This is really just a brief explanation of a network that is so dense. It involves so many people, all of whom are part of the elites and part of various institutions. That basically they're running the intellectual side of the show, and they're also involved with all the politicians at the time. All the economists were all part of this big network. So in order for me to get to grips with this, I then had a moment like a road to Damascus experience when I thought, I'm going to look into the life of Frieda von Richthofen, because she clearly is a very significant player in the sense that she was kind of controlling Lawrence in a way, because when I found out that he didn't really want to write Lady Chatterley's Lover, that became one of the kind of 4 or 5 seminal works of the 20th century that were involved, really to do with the New World Order, the Age of Aquarius, the New Age. So in 1929, before he died, he was more or less coerced by Frida to write Lady Chatterley's Lover, because Frida also had an affair with Middleton Murray when Lawrence died, and of course Middleton Murray was part of this commune. So the effects of this commune throughout these people's life were continually repeated. So Lawrence wrote Lady Chatterley's Lover, and when he died, it had been banned, and after he died, of course, it was published and then became one of the mantras, of the sexual revolution, the counterculture. This was never really Lawrence's intention. He was concerned with far more, deeper philosophical arguments than the sexual revolution that was usurped by the agendas and the Illuminati, to program youth. So after he died, I found out that the rights to Lady Chatterley's Lover had been sold by Frieda von Richthofen to Baron Philip Rothschild. So, those are two names, that Richthofen and Rothschild. So then I thought, I'm going to look into the family background of Frieda von Richthofen, because clearly there's something going on here. And she was, more or less with Lawrence all his life. What's she doing hanging around with this kind of bad-tempered, guy with tuberculosis who, must have been hell to live with? And at the time during the commune, the other people were describing how they'd have these vicious fights, and Lawrence would take her like a dog takes a bitch, and that Catherine Mansfield spoke about Frida as being like a fat German Christmas pudding. I mean, the level of animosity and bitchiness among all these people was actually a joy to behold and to write about. So after I kind of deconstructed the Zennor commune, which was very pertinent to me because I'm occupying the same space now. I'm walking those places, and I've also occupied and gone into these people's heads, and I've seen all the links between them, and that led me on to doing a kind of deep exploration into a previous commune, which was the Mont Verita commune, and the Mont Verita commune answered a lot of questions and filled in a lot of the jigsaw pieces about how the communes were used, to bring in a counterculture agenda and a counterculture program, and this one commune I thought was an organic commune that had formed by these eccentrics where I subsequently came to live. Now I realised that this was one of many communes, many agendas, and there was a kind of lot of people running these communes, and it wasn't the people that were suddenly put there, that suddenly arrived there. It was a real program that became one of the kind of most interesting aspects of what then subsequently became the counterculture movement, and I think we're going to talk about that. That we're going to go on to that now.